25th of March 1941, a 19-year-old Sunday school teacher, Eileen Barrett, she left her home at Backside Farm here in Trawden, and she was making her way over to Colne and to the Colne Technical College. It was a wet, miserable evening. Now, she didn't want to leave her home, but she knew she had to. She was in the process of making a dress, and this dress was part of an exam, but it was also a dress that she was going to proudly wear at an upcoming special event. Unfortunately for poor Eileen, that special event would never take place, and she would never get to wear that dress. So who was Eileen Barrett? Well, like I said at the very start, she was 19 years old, and she was the only daughter of Ida and Alan Barrett. And she lived here in this little village of Trawden, just a few miles away from Colne itself. Now, Eileen, she was a very attractive young lady. She had a lot of friends, she was well respected, she was well mannered, well thought of in, like I said, this little village. She had had several boyfriends, but nothing too serious. But she was always willing to sacrifice her own time to help others. And with the onset of the Second World War, we're talking 1941 now, Eileen had volunteered her services to help evacuees. She would also help here in St Mary's Church. She was a Sunday school teacher, so she was very popular, like I said, with this local community. Now, on the evening in question, the 25th of March, like I said, 1941, Eileen, from all accounts, she looked out of one of the windows at the farmhouse where she was living with her parents, and it was a wet, miserable evening. And this was about 6:20. She said to her mother she didn't really want to go out. And we also have to mention that Eileen, she wasn't one for staying out too late as it was. And more so in 1941, because like I said, this was at the early beginnings of the Second World War, and most notably, it was during blackouts. So Eileen, she wasn't one for leaving her home, the safety of her own home. Now, on this particular evening, it was coming to the end, from what we gather, of a series of classes where she was learning how to make her own clothes. Times were hard, rationing was now kicking in, and even clothing was very difficult to come by. So Eileen went on a course where she would learn how to make her own clothes, her own attire. Her parents, they said to Eileen, look, get yourself out, get yourself over to Colne and get this exam passed. Also, get this dress that you are making finished. Eileen was going to wear this self-made dress for an upcoming special event. Now, she would leave her home at Backside Farm. She would get on the local bus, which obviously took her on the route from Trawden to Colne. And she would arrive sometime before 7 o'clock at the Colne Technical College. It was just after 9 o'clock that evening when, after finishing her classes, Eileen left the Colne Technical College, and she made her way to the nearby bus stop, which is literally just a matter of yards away, around 30 yards away. And it's just on the corner of Albert Road and Linden Road, so basically directly in front of me now. A loud piercing scream would be heard by a local man by the name of Robert Jewerdon, who was walking along this stretch of road and making his way in that direction. Now, Robert turned round to see if he could see where this loud piercing scream had come from, and he managed to walk back down quickly. It was here where he saw Eileen in a lot of distress. Now, at this point, she was leaning against an old lamppost. He asked her what to do, what is wrong, and she said a man had come up behind me and he grabbed me by the throat and punched me in the back. Now, this man, Eileen, didn't know who he was. He turned up at the same bus stop as Eileen, which is just here. And he said he was waiting for the next buzz. She then felt this punch to her back, and this is when she let out the scream. Now, another man by the name of Mr. Keith, he was also nearby, and he was in a doorway waiting for the buzz. The weather, you see, had been wet and miserable that evening, so he took cover in this doorway. It was when Keith made his way to where we stood now, and roughly where Vicky's now standing is where the attack took place. When Mr. Keith got here, and he got to the end of where Linden Road is, which is this stretch, he looked down and he noticed a fleeting figure of a man running into the darkness. Now, this was obviously the attack, or the attacker, on poor Eileen. But where Vicky is now stood is within a few feet of where that attack took place on Eileen Barrett. So as you can see, it has changed a lot. But like I said, where Vicky is roughly where Eileen would have been attacked that evening. The thing is now, we do have a photograph from this direction in the centre of the road, just roughly where that white van has just passed. And you will see that that photograph does show the original furnishings, which are still here. So you've still got the original metal gates. Obviously this wall is the same. The shops, the storefronts have kind of changed, but for the best part, everything else is the same. The lamppost has since gone, the bus stop sign's since gone, but we can line up shots using that original photograph that the police took not too long after the attack on Eileen. With Mr. Keith obviously attending the scene with Robert Durden, and like I said, he stood on the corner somewhere around here and he looked down Linden Road where that fleeting figure of the man disappeared into the darkness. So we'll make our way down now. Now, Mr. Keith's first name was George, and he was the newly appointed postmaster here in Colne. Now, neither of them, George or Robert, neither of them chased after this strange, shadowy character. After all, this poor lady had been punched in the back. They didn't know how serious this attack was at the time. But as you can see, as we make our way down in pitch blackness, it would have been difficult anyway to catch up with the attacker. He could have disappeared down any of the side streets, such as Brown Street East. And I think it's pronounced Crag Street further down. But he could have disappeared in any numerous side streets down Linden Road. But it's certainly down here he ran. Trying to help Eileen best they could. The buzz that she was waiting for, and the gentleman, George himself, was waiting for, it soon arrived. They helped Eileen onto the bus, where they would make their way to the Horrifying Lane tram depot, which is just a matter of minutes away and where we're going to go to next. But it's whilst she was on the bus, she was kept moaning in pain. But both of the people who came to her aid, George and Robert, they just thought it was down to shock and obviously a severe punch to her back. Now, when they got to the Horrifying Lane tram depot and they assisted Eileen off the bus, this is when they realised this was more serious. They realised that Eileen desperately needed hospital attention. The former tram depot, which was located on what was then known as Horrifying Lane, was directly in front of us just here. And it's literally a 5-minute ride, or it would have been, back on the bus. Myself and Vicky have got here probably in 2 minutes in the car, but we would estimate that the bus itself would have taken around 5 minutes. So not too far from where the attack took place on Eileen Barrett. As you can see now though, there are no signs, no remnants of where that tram depot used to be, but it was certainly just here on this corner. Now, it was once they were here, Eileen, and when she was escorted off the bus itself, this is when Robert and George realised just how serious this attack had been. When the bus arrived here at the Hythe Lane tram depot, this is when both Robert and George realised something more sinister had occurred. Both their hands were pretty much saturated with blood. Eileen's back, her clothing was drenched in the blood that was now coming out of her back at some pace. Eileen was looking extremely pale. She was very weak. They took it into the Hythe Lane tram depot where they sat her down. They quickly telephoned for an ambulance. They gave Eileen a glass of brandy, which she thanked them for. Now, the ambulance itself duly arrived. It was literally within minutes of the telephone call being made. When the ambulance arrived, the ambulance crew patched up Eileen best they could. They got her into the ambulance and then they transported her over to the nearby Hartley Hospital, which is in that direction along Keighley Road. It's a good 5 minutes away from where we are now. It was within 10 minutes of being escorted off the ambulance and into Hartley Hospital where poor Eileen would succumb from the injuries that she sustained outside the bus stop near the Technical College. It was here at St Mary's over in Trawden where the body of Eileen Barrett will be interred on Saturday the 29th of March. And there were hundreds of people who attended to pay their respects. The streets were lined, these narrow streets here in Trawden, because we have to remember that this is also the former home of where Eileen lived at the time of her attack, in a place known as Backside Farm, which is just a matter of a few minutes walk away over in that direction. But we are going to try and find Eileen's final resting place based on newspaper reports at the time. And from what was written, we know she was interred, she was buried within a far corner in a secluded part of this tiny graveyard. So hopefully we should be able to find her without too much difficulty. By 10 p.m. that evening, Detective Sergeant Sturzaker, he was informed of an attack on a lady. Now obviously he didn't know who this person was at the time, but by 20 past 10 he had arrived at the Hartley Hospital, in which time poor Eileen had passed away. By 10:30, an identification, I will presume from some form of ID that she may have been carrying on her, that was quickly made. And Alan, Eileen's father, he was informed that his daughter had sadly died from an attack outside the college itself. Now, Alan, he made his way to the hospital where he would ID this person, this poor victim, as that of being his daughter, Eileen. On June the 4th, an adjourned inquest took place onto the attack and obviously the death of Eileen Barrett. And it would be recorded that she had died from an attack by a person or persons unknown. Now, her death was caused by the piercing of an artery close to her heart, but from the back. She was stabbed just or close to proximity of her right shoulder. But the blade used was a double-edged blade, and it must have been quite long in length. Maybe 5, maybe 6 inches in length. But it was long enough certainly to go from the back and towards one of the main arteries leading to her heart, and she would die from internal bleeding. Interestingly, it was also said at the inquest that if that blade had been just a millimetre or two further away from where the artery obviously was located, Eileen most certainly would have survived that attack that evening, and she may well have gone on to identify the person involved. Now, I've got up on my phone the actual, well, part of the newspaper article itself, where it clearly shows a village in mourning, funeral of murder victim, Canon Dempsey's tributes at Trawden. And you can see where it says Trawden was a village of mourning on Saturday, when in the sheltered corner of St Mary's Churchyard, the remains were laid to rest of Miss Eileen Barrett. So a sheltered corner. Now, we've had a look, not just in the corners, here in the churchyard. We've had a look at pretty much every headstone, and as you can see, there aren't that many. But we simply cannot find where Eileen is interred. Now, I might pop in the church because there is somebody in there playing the organ, so I might just go in and see if maybe the vicar's around and he might be able to shed some light on where Eileen herself is buried. Now, unfortunately, I've just been inside the church, and they do have a number of children who are all singing away, so I'm not going to disturb anybody this morning. But again, I've had another walk round with Vicky. Just one last check to see if we can find anything on the Barrett family, not just Eileen, but also Alan and Ida, her parents. And we just can't find anything, which is sad, because I really did believe that today we would locate a final resting place of one of the victims of the stories that we cover, because we do encounter this quite a lot. But sadly, even though it's a small graveyard, it's just not happening again. But again, it isn't for the lack of trying. Now, interestingly, and this wasn't reported in any papers or anywhere at the time, but police, they would soon obviously start to investigate the attack on Eileen, and obviously it was now a murder case. And news would soon filter through to them that an attack on a 16-year-old girl had occurred just the day before, but this time over in a place known as Reedley, which is about 4 or 4.5 miles away from the town centre of Colne, and it's a place where we're going to go to next to tell that side of the story. On the 24th of March 1941, on the day before the attack on Eileen Barrett, 16-year-old Teresa Ann Baldwin, she had left her employment in one of these neighbouring houses here on Reedley Drive, and she was a paid domestic servant. But it seems that when she was making her way along this stretch of road, and we're not quite sure exactly where it took place, but she was accosted by a person of unknown. Now, fortunately for Teresa, being a young, fit and healthy young girl, she managed to fight off the attacker, and she screamed for help. The attacker, obviously alerted and alarmed by Teresa's bravery and strength, he fled the scene almost immediately, and Teresa would thankfully make her way home safely on Reedley Road, at number 3 Reedley Road. But we're going to make the walk along Reedley Drive and head towards where Teresa lived. Now, the police seem to think that maybe the murder of Eileen Barrett and the attack on Teresa Baldwin may well have been done by the same hands, by the same person. It's difficult to know for sure, and it's something we'll certainly never ever be able to prove. But the police, like I said, when they began the investigations into the death of Eileen Barrett, Teresa came forward and told them the story of the attack that occurred somewhere on this stretch. just the evening before. So obviously they were interested in finding witnesses, hopefully finding people who may have seen some man or person exiting this area who might have been acting suspiciously. But unfortunately, nothing could be found. No other witnesses came forward, and certainly nobody came forward describing anything unusual or suspicious looking in and around this area, Reedley and Reedley Drive and Reedley Road. The murder of Eileen Barrett and obviously the attack on Teresa Baldwin have remained unsolved all these years. The police themselves would interview over 5,000 people in total, especially with the murder of Eileen Barrett, but nothing was ever found, nothing was ever proven, nobody was ever charged. So to this day, like I said, it is an unsolved murder case. Vicky just said off camera, she doesn't believe the two attacks were committed by the same hands. They more than likely were committed by two different people. After all, there's a 4.5 mile difference between where we are now in Reedley and where the attack on Eileen took place over in Colne. Okay, it's not that far, but in 1941, Blackout, you know, maybe it might just be a hard ask for somebody to make that trip back, like I said, when it was a blackout in 1941. Tell us your thoughts down below. And again, the difference is, Eileen, she was stabbed in the back by her attacker. She sadly died. If the attacker had the same MO, the same ways about him, surely he may have attacked more ferociously Teresa and Baldwin. He maybe have used the knife there and then. After all, the attack on Eileen only took her a matter of seconds. He approached both girls from behind, he grabbed them by the throat. But in the case of Eileen, he also stabbed her quickly towards the right shoulder blade. This was only less than 24 hours after the attack on Teresa Baldwin. So I personally think it may, like Vic said, it may well have been two separate cases, two different stories. But the police certainly linked both together just simply because two girls had been attacked, both young girls, both had been grabbed from behind, one was stabbed, the other one wasn't. Tell us your thoughts down below. Do you think that these two attacks were committed by the same pair of hands? Teresa, as we touched upon, she would tell the police that she would have to fight off the attacker and fight for her life. And the case itself was never reported in the local newspapers until days after the attack on Eileen Barrett. Now, as the investigation proceeded, many other young women would come forward and they would speak of how they were attacked by a lone assailant, a lone male. And apparently, like I said, because it was a blackout, he was hiding in the shadows, he was hiding in the doorways, and in places such as this where we are now, these little ginnels, these back alleys. But in each case, this assailant, he had grabbed these women by the throat. Now, Vicky's come up with another good point here. Just repeat what you just said to me.
Well, when you do think about it, she was, Teresa was the first attack to person.
24 hours before.
Now, I'm thinking now, because they both was grabbed by the throat, when he grabbed Teresa by the throat, then he realised he didn't actually have a weapon to do anything to her other than strangle her.
Yeah, grab her and strangle her.
So the next day he went out with a knife. Plausible?
Possibly, that is plausible. Maybe he learnt from the day before, or, well, I say learnt, I don't mean that in a nasty way, but did he think, Christ, I should have been a bit more,
yeah,
I know it sounds horrible, but a bit more ruthless. So he took a knife out with him the night after. That is a good plausibility.
Yeah, that's all I can think for them to be thinking.
Yeah,
the link.
yeah, possibly. Comment down below again. Like I said, tell us your thoughts. Is that plausible? I think it's a good thought. It's something to think about. Tell us your thoughts down below. Now, police, they were quick to play down any speculation of a Colne Strangler being on the loose in and around Reedley, Briarfield, Burnley, Nelson and indeed Colne. But certainly somebody was out, not to cause mischief, but to cause serious harm. These strangulations, these accounts, they must have gone on days, if not weeks, prior to the death and murder of Eileen Barrett. How far back they went, we don't know, because the newspaper articles, like I said, there isn't any. There's just nothing in the newspapers about these other attacks. It's just what the police told reporters, that other young women came forward after the death of Eileen Barrett. So it's very hard to prove one way or another just how true these attacks were. Now, a few years ago, a book came out called The Blackout Murders, and it was written by, or it has been written by, Neil Storey. And in that book, Neil himself tries to link the murder of Winifred Evans and the Colne Strangler itself to a man by the name of Arthur Hayes. Now, Arthur Hayes, he was a young man back in 1941, and he was a Royal Airman. He was in the army, the Second World War. But in 1941, he was still living in Colne. He had 3 children and he was married, and he lived on Herald Street. Now, in 1944, he was based down in Beccles, down in Suffolk. He will be charged with the murder, the assault, and then the murder on a young WAAF woman by the name of Winifred Evans. Now, she would be sadly found lying face down in a ditch. She'd been assaulted, physically assaulted, and Arthur Hayes himself, he will become the main suspect quite quickly with the murder of Winifred. Now, obviously, when he was brought into questioning, he denied any knowledge of this and blah, blah, blah. He had a lot of alibis, but the police soon found flaws in his statements. It was whilst he was in prison, he would fake letters to the police saying that the wrong man had been caught, the wrong man had been charged with the murder of Winifred Evans. Somehow he had managed to smuggle out a letter from his own cell that he had handwritten but using block capitals. But it was some wordings in those letters that raised suspicions of the local police, and the police quickly realised that Hayes himself was faking these letters. Not only that, from all accounts, it was the paper that was used on these letters that the police could simply tie up to the same paper that was found in one of the offices of the prison warden. So Arthur Hayes, he kind of dropped himself in it big time. Now, Hayes himself will be found guilty of the murder of Winifred Evans, and he will be sentenced to hang. Whether or not Arthur Hayes is the Colne Strangler or was the Colne Strangler, again, we will never know. He did live close to where the attack on Eileen took place, like I said, within a 5-minute walk. So perhaps Arthur Hayes is the person responsible. It will be very difficult to prove. Now, the one photograph that is missing from this entire story today is that of Arthur Hayes. As far as I'm aware, there are no known photographs of him anywhere, unless family members obviously have them. But the press certainly didn't release any photos, as far as I'm aware, of Arthur Hayes. So unfortunately, we can't put any over this footage today. In 1966, and 25 years after the attacks that took place in and around Colne, a local newspaper did an article on the murder on Eileen Barrett. And in that article, there's an interview with a former police superintendent who was either involved or he knew about this horrific murder on Eileen. Now, he would go on to say, and it's whether or not you believe this is true or not, but he would go on to say that the police most certainly knew who the murderer was of Eileen Barrett. It's a hard one to digest, is this, because the police, they told a reporter that they had somebody in mind who was guilty of these attacks. And the attack on Eileen was a case of mistaken identity. The attacker was somebody who lived in another town just a mile or a mile and a half away from Colne, where the attack on Eileen took place. The police were certain that they knew who this person is or was. They're also certain that the attack on Eileen it was intended for another lady. Now, when they went to question this person, he had a strong alibi from all accounts. He could prove where he was on all these dates, and his alibis apparently stood up. What I personally find hard to believe with the theory that the police say they knew who the guilty person was for the murder of Eileen Barrett and the attacks on all these other women's, I find it hard to believe, because if they were certain they knew who it was, why didn't they pursue it further? Why didn't they go further into it? Why would they tell a journalist that they knew who he were and then that is it? Because there's nothing else in any of the papers about this, just this one article. It seems very bizarre. If they were certain that they knew who this person was, surely for the benefit of the family, the Barrett family, they would have pursued it. They would have gone deeper into it. I'm not saying they didn't, but I find it hard to believe that they did, to be honest, because nobody was ever brought to justice. Also, if they knew who this person was, why didn't they bring him in and do an identity parade and bring in all these other witnesses who said they were attacked by a person of unknown? Surely some of these young girls, they may have caught a glimpse of who attacked them. I know it may have been difficult. After all, like I said, it was during the blackouts. But surely somebody would have been able to give some form of identification. Did this ever happen? Was an identity parade ever put together with this person who they were sure was guilty? I find it hard to believe this ever occurred. Not only that, from all accounts, the police were also aware of the lady who should have been the intended target. They knew who she was. And Eileen was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the murderer, it was a case of mistaken identity. Again, I'm finding it very hard to believe this tale. It does bring me to question the integrity of the journalists at the time. Were they sensationalising this murder on Eileen Barrett and the Colne Strangler as a package? Were they trying to beef it up a little bit, make it more juicier? I mean, obviously, this is disturbing in itself, because you've got to trust journalists to record and report the correct news. But it does seem like we may have had an overzealous journalist who wanted to sell more papers, who wanted more people to read his account of what happened 25 years prior. It's plausible. After all, there is no other record, or there are no other records of the police reportedly saying that they knew who this person was. Tell us your thoughts down below on that. Do you think we've got one overzealous reporter? Or did the police know who was responsible, but for some reason, they could not disprove this person's alibi? Be interesting to know your thoughts. Now, where we're walking now is Colne Road, and we're heading towards where Teresa Baldwin would have been making her way, well, just after the attack on herself on the 24th of March, and she lived at number 3 Reedley Road. So it's a fair walk from Reedley Drive itself to Reedley Road. It's a good 5 minutes, if not slightly longer. But she would have been walking up this road, maybe running up this road after that attack, in some serious distress. So that is all from here in Reedley, just on the outskirts of Colne, and where the tragic murder of Eileen Barrett took place. Now, if you've heard the story of the Colne Strangler, myself and Vicky will be interested to know your thoughts on this story. Do you think the police did know or had an idea who the perpetrator actually was? Personally, I don't think they did. This person went about his business unknown, and he managed to flee into the darkness of the blackouts back in 1941. But please comment down below on this story. If you can, also please share it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because we've got more stories just like this coming. Now, in the meantime, guys, we want you to stay safe, stay curious, don't forget to keep looking up at the skies, and don't forget to keep looking around your environment, because you just never know what you're going to see. But in the meantime, guys, we want you to take care, look after yourselves, and we'll be back with more tales from a dark but at times glorious past. So take care, everybody.